There are a lot of reasons to talk about the feminine, and I thought I would take this podcast to do just that. In our current society, with everything going on socially, politically, and all of the rest, wading through the basic polarities of masculine and feminine energy and understanding them fully is really important, not just for us as modern mystics, but as societal modern-day human beings. The feminine holds an important post in our lives, in our relationships, in our universe, in our spiritual practice, and simply based on the nature of our culture, the feminine has been quite forgotten and repressed until now. Welcome to the Modern Mystics Podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kaivalya, the Yoga Doctor. I'm here to help you realize your potential as a spiritual leader and elevate your work in the realm of yoga, mysticism, and spirituality. This podcast covers all of our favorite topics: yoga, alchemy, astrology, divination, spirituality, psychology, ritual, and mystical practices, both ancient and modern. Get ready to uplevel your status as a modern mystic. This podcast has been on my mind for a while. Fielding questions regarding the feminine versus the masculine has been a part of my work for a long time, whether I'm talking about yoga practice, astrology, tarot cards, mythology, spirituality, divination, ritual, or mysticism in general. The polarity of these energies always comes up and always has questions. Now, a full disclaimer here, there's no way that in one podcast I'm going to cover everything that I would want to or everything that you need to know regarding the feminine and the masculine. So really, this podcast is designed to simply open the discussion and hopefully to get you thinking about how the feminine and the masculine play out in your life as an individual and your relationships and your spiritual practice and all the rest. Because truly, our entire world is dominated by this polarity of energies. It is within us. It exists in everything that we work with, do, understand, think. The whole universe is dominated by these energies, the masculine and the feminine. Everything that we see, everything that we understand, has a combination of both of these energies operating at all times. Typically, anything that we are working with or any person we understand or know or see, everything will have one as dominant over the other. And even that said, there is still a mix of both within everything. Okay, so let me give you an example. So as human beings, and just so you know, this is not a discussion of gender. This is a discussion of energies innate within all of us. Within human beings, we have both the masculine and the feminine in operation at all times. Now, we as yogis, we know this because we've studied the chakras, we've studied the nadis, the energy channels, and we know that there are three primary energy channels within us. The feminine energy channel called the Ida nadi, which begins and ends on the left side of our body and embraces the qualities of the feminine like the moon, the shadow, unconscious. And then on the right side, we have the masculine nadi, the Pingala nadi or energy channel, which embraces the qualities of the sun or solar energy, heat, consciousness, light, and ascendancy. So this is within every human being, regardless of how we identify ourselves as gender. Within all of us is the masculine and the feminine energies. However, within each of us, there will be a dominant energy. There will be either more masculinity or more femininity. These things can be fluid. They can certainly shift throughout our lifetimes, absolutely. But at any given moment, there will be a little more of one than there will of the other. So again, this exists in all things, this masculine versus feminine energy. So I thought maybe it would be helpful to take some time to explain more the qualities of these energies so that we know what they do and also how they exist within us. The masculine qualities is the perceived world, consciousness, light, ascendancy, rising up. We think about this often in terms, I think about it often in terms of the hero's journey. So in the hero's journey, a hero starts out on the path, is starting out in the known world, is wandering along, and then something occurs, usually some kind of an inciting incident or event that turns this person's world upside down, literally, on its head, and draws that person into an underworld experience where they have to discover their own triggers, they have to work out their own fears. That underworld experience is the domain of the feminine. So the feminine rules unconsciousness, the underworld, the shadow, the depth, and any lunar energy that is around us. It's through that challenging time, it's through that underworld experience that the hero then resolves those core unconscious triggers or issues and moves back into the real world in order to bring with them the gifts that they learned in the underworld and ascend into that spot, that place as the hero. So hopefully as you're listening to me describe this journey, you can hear that the first quarter of that journey, the person leaving their known world, going on about their day, la la la, everything's fine, that's still in the masculine realm. And then as they transition into that challenging place where they have to really dig deep and learn all the things within them that they're trying to discover or know, that's the realm of the feminine. Those times where we have to dig deep, trust our gut, move from our intuition, move through challenge. That's the realm of the feminine. And then they move back into the masculine again for the last quarter of the hero's journey, where they bring that gift back that they learned to the world to share it with them, where they rise up into that status as a hero. Historically speaking, the feminine has been quite repressed, at least for the last 2,500 years, but I want you to know that that wasn't always the case. That prior to 2,500 years ago, we had a very feminine-based mythology that honored the feminine in all things, that honored the cycles of our world, whether it be the cycles of seasons or the cycles of the moon or the cycles of the earth moving around the sun. Feminine time is cyclical in this way, and masculine time is linear. So there was a time before our current masculine-dominated culture and paradigm that it was more of a feminine-dominated culture and paradigm, and there are still remnants of those things, archaeologically speaking, but also psychologically speaking. The masculine paradigm shifts us into, again, a more linear version of time, seeking to look into the future, to not feel that flow, that ebb and flow that is a very lunar experience, very feminine experience. But the masculine also very much focuses on the conscious. And that is, it's not all bad in and of itself. It definitely has its positive attributes or elements, like when we're conscious, when we're aware, we can stay in the present moment. This is all good, especially as a spiritual practitioner. We definitely want consciousness. We want to be able to stay present, to stay in the now. But if we are doing it to the detriment of the feminine, we're losing that if we're forgetting it, then we are blind to what it has to offer. And it creates more egoism or egotism than it does awareness. And we want to be in full awareness of our world, of our consciousness. We want to have full access to our psyche. And the psyche, of course, has that masculine element, which is the consciousness, and the feminine element, which is the unconsciousness. So to focus most solely on the masculine means that we're planning and executing. We're focused on time. We're planning things out. We have our calendars, and we're looking to the future. We're very concerned about what's happening at this moment, and we don't have a lot of softness around that. The softness comes with the feminine and that idea of cyclical time or cycles or ebb and flow, where we're not so focused on the future, where we don't necessarily need to plan things, but we can allow them to happen as they will. And you can see how both of these things can be beneficial, absolutely beneficial for our lives. But to focus on one to the detriment of the other can be harmful. Now, I mentioned a bit the psychology of the feminine and the masculine, and this is also important for us to consider because, again, all of us as individuals have both feminine and masculine within us, and culturally, we are more of a masculine culture, and to the point that it has often been to the detriment of the feminine. The feminine has been repressed. The feminine has been shunned. The feminine has been made we believe that the feminine is bad. So feminine qualities are often seen as negative. It's not good. The feminine is unconscious. And if we don't understand what that word means in terms of psychology, that can feel like a bad word. The feminine is thought of as impulsive, hysterical. The feminine can be thought of as wishy-washy, indecisive. The feminine can be thought of as emotional, which, again, none of these things are actually bad, but they are perceived as bad given that our culture is dominated by the masculine to the repression of the feminine, okay? So what we really want is access to both as whole and complete and healthy human beings. We want to have access to both. Both are appropriate, necessary, good, beneficial in their correct amounts and in their correct times. So psychologically speaking, there's a lot of wisdom and benefit to the feminine. It is within the feminine, the unconscious, that we have our intuition, our gut feelings, which I think all of us listening to this podcast will know anytime we've ignored our gut, we've done it to our detriment. The unconscious or the feminine is where we access our emotions. And again, our emotions are appropriate responses. It's an appropriate human behavior. They're not bad. Again, no matter what gender we embody. The feminine is our inner child. The feminine is the source of our greatest wisdom. The feminine is also our triggers. And this is perhaps one of the touchiest elements of the feminine. When we have an emotional response that is disproportionate to the situation at hand, it is a trigger. And this is something that was put in place at a very early age and is coming around to be resolved. The feminine is the source of greatest healing and the source of our greatest wisdom. And it is only when we explore it and do our shadow work that we have access to it. To ignore it or to repress it, to deny it, to make it a bad thing, to place a negative connotation on it, is to not accept who we are as whole and complete human beings. In terms of yoga, yoga asks us to unite. And the real yoga is not us uniting with another individual. It's the uniting of all the parts of ourselves, the parts of our psyche, this unconscious part with the conscious part, gaining access to the wisdom of the deep unconscious, even as we stay aware and present in the conscious mind. Now, this is probably a good time to address the heavily masculine slant of yoga. So this may come as a surprise, but this is something that I discovered in not only my work and my personal spiritual practice with yoga, but also in my research as an academic in the fields of mythology and psychology. So the yoga text that we most heavily rely on is the Yoga Sutra, and it was written about 2,000 years ago. There are other yogic texts, of course, the Upanishads and the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the Bhagavad Gita. But if we were to look at specifically yogic philosophy and how it works, we're looking primarily at the Yoga Sutra to give us that quick understanding and embodiment of yoga wisdom. All right, so if it was written 2,000 years ago, based on my small history lesson from a few moments ago in this podcast, it was written at the time that the masculine current culture was dominant. And that makes sense, okay? I mean, these things all go in cycles because they do. So we have a masculine-dominated culture right now. I feel like that's totally we are now aware of it, and I think that the trend will move toward the feminine once again. But it's a cycle. So we discover yoga really in the peak of this masculine-dominated cycle, which again is fine. There's nothing bad here. It's just something that we must be aware of as we practice yoga, particularly for those of us who lean toward the feminine, and particularly for those of us who identify more strongly with the feminine energy, okay? Yoga's primary practice, really, truly, is meditation. I know that we're in love with asana here in the West, but even that is a very masculine practice. The movement, the forced movement of the body into shapes in a very organized way is a very masculine practice. And I know many of us do it in more of a feminine way. We do these mandala things on our mats, but it's still quite a masculine approach. But really, the gem of yoga, as far as practice goes, is meditation. That's the core of yogic philosophy, practice. I mean, look at any text, look at any historical context or background, and meditation is really where it's at. Well, yogic meditation is quite masculine. We are meant to sit still, to not move, okay, masculine. And we are meant to use our conscious mind to try and essentially shut off or override the unconscious. It's a very conscious practice, which again is very masculine. There really isn't any room for the unconscious in meditation, and there really isn't any mention of it either. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. Number one, Patanjali is writing the Yoga Sutra at the height of the masculine movement in terms of culture. But also, 2,000 years ago, I don't know that Patanjali or anybody else really knew what the unconscious was or how it worked in terms of psychology, right? The information just may not have been there. Well, we have the information now, and it means we need to honor that information and adapt our understanding of how meditation works and how it may work best given this new information and this understanding that the unconscious has such an important role to play in our health, well-being, happiness, and the psycho-spiritual state of yoga. So meditation as it is written is a very masculine practice. And if you have done meditation and found that, wow, it isn't soothing, that perhaps you've gotten really good at putting a happy facade over all of the anger and frustration that still is there despite all that meditation, then that will be a result of a hyper-masculine meditation practice that doesn't necessarily address the feminine parts of who you are. So getting at the unconscious in meditation requires some tweaks and shifts, and these are things that I write extensively about in my book, Yoga Beyond the Mat, which was a direct derivation of my academic work, my dissertation. So check out Yoga Beyond the Mat for some adaptations and modifications of meditation and yogic practices that help us to embody and embrace the feminine a little bit more. So again, as I said in the beginning of this podcast, the concept of masculine and feminine is huge. The ramifications are huge. The way in which we talk about it are vast, and we have to talk about it in terms of our personal psychology, in terms of our practice, in terms of our culture, in terms of our history, in terms of our mythology. And the feminine now, because it has been so repressed for the last 2,000 to 2,500 years, is very misunderstood, right? It's often thought of as bad, and it's often thought of as weak. And so I thought maybe it would be helpful to give you some thoughts around how not weak the feminine is. But what I want to do also is be clear that though the feminine is strong, is fierce, the feminine is also different from the masculine. And I think that has become a challenge for us in our modern day culture, with those who identify more strongly with the feminine energy, trying to be equal, trying to be seen as much as those who identify strongly with the masculine. I think the mistake that has been made is thinking that equality equals sameness. When the feminine is in its full power, it is not the same as the masculine. It is just as powerful, but it is different. And so the bar for equality shouldn't be sameness, but simply rather equality. So let me give you an example, and this is one of my favorite examples because, the feminine has gotten the rap of being meek, mild, weak, emotional, indecisive. That's just categorically not true for the feminine. And the way that we understand better both feminine and masculine energies in terms of our world, our culture, ourselves, is often through mythology. Right? They are embodied in these archetypes that we get to know and understand and learn. And so we don't have a ton of these archetypes in our Western culture just because of the nature of the dominant Western mythologies or religions. But historically in Western culture, we have Greek mythology, which does percolate down and which many of us know and understand. And we have, this wonderful Greek goddess named Pallas Athena. And she is a warrior princess, right? Now, when the god Mars, or Ares, who is also a war god, goes to war, he does it in a very different way than Pallas Athena, right? So we've got Ares, we've got Pallas Athena. They're both warrior gods and goddesses, but they're very different energetically. When Mars or Ares goes to war, he will do so with great force, with great might. There will be some tactical plans, but often it will be boots on the ground with just the robustness and the force moving forward. And I think of it as an army marching. Right, so they are organized, but they're literally physically ready to put their physical energy into kicking ass. Pallas Athena, she's also a warrior princess, but she's more tactical. She's going to plan things out a little bit better. She's going to designate the way in which others will be boots on the ground on her behalf. She's going to use a bow and arrow, and she's going to be at a distance, ready to still strike fear into the hearts of her opponents and decimate them on the battlefield, but again, from a different angle than Ares would do it. So as Ares is just like, I'm going to plow forward and charge forth with all this might and energy, Pallas Athena is going to be in the drawing room with all of her little characters on the board, moving them around, making sure they're in the right place, being very tactical and strategic with her efforts to fight. Both will fight the war. Both are capable of getting the job done. Both will often need each other to get the job done in a thorough and complete way. So in our yogic pantheon, we also have some goddesses that maybe we don't see readily in Western culture that I think are very helpful and handy for us to understand the power and the strength of the feminine, which is very much there. We are, the feminine is not weak. The feminine is not inferior in any way. However, the feminine is different, okay? It is different. Equality does not mean sameness. So we have Kali, who is a very ferocious goddess. She cuts off the head of all of her opponents, and she eats their blood. She drinks their blood. Well, this can be terrifying, if our understanding of the feminine is supposed to be quiet, shy, nurturing, soft. It's not a lot quiet and shy, nurturing, or soft about Kali. And as she moves through the battlefield and slices off the head, we have to understand her motives and motivations. She's doing it to protect. Okay, so if any of us have ever seen a mother trying to protect her young, then we start to understand Kali's energy. She's doing it to protect those that she loves. And there's nothing more feminine than that. It's a powerful force. And ultimately, it is true love that puts her ferocity in check. The witness or the seeing of her greatest love, who is Shiva. And Shiva allows her to calm that energy and bring herself back into balance. And I think that this is beautiful. This story, it's a quick story, but it showcases how the feminine and masculine are inherently interwoven, and absolutely need each other for balance. We see this within ourselves. If we feel the masculine energy becoming too great, it is the feminine that will help us to counteract it, or vice versa. And again, we all move through different energies within our lives. So for example, people who identify as mother is actually a very masculine energy. That corralling of children, that teaching them, that focusing them, that raising them, that very protective energy, but also that very structured guidance energy. Mother is a very masculine energy. So those who identify as mother will do so for about the first 10 to 12 years of a child's life, and then that energy can soften. And if that person's natural polarity is feminine, they can move back into that feminine space where they are the receiver. Feminine receives, masculine delivers. Feminine asks to be cherished, masculine asks to be respected. All of us have a natural polarity. And again, this is not about gender, okay? I'm not talking about gender here. All genders are capable of all of these things. However, every individual will often identify with either masculine or feminine as a dominant polarity. And this is particularly important as we talk about relationship. And I mean intimate relationship with another human being. And again, we're not talking about any kind of gender or heteronormativity or anything like that here, okay? I'm just talking two people in an intimate relationship, regardless of gender or sexuality. In that intimate relationship between two people, what is happening is an external manifestation of our internal world. This is very much an alchemical experience, as above, so below. And when we are in an intimate relationship with another, we are literally playing out in front of us in a very physical way the manifestation of what happens on the inside. So we need to have in an intimate relationship an understanding of which partner holds primarily the masculine energy and which partner holds primarily the feminine energy. Again, both partners will have both, of course. Both partners can vacillate between both. But primarily, one energy will be predominant in one individual. And it's really helpful to know this. It's really, really helpful to know which polarity each person is on in order to facilitate the deepening of that relationship and allow it to create its alchemical magic. Alchemy, in its heart, is the marriage, the union of the feminine and the masculine. That is the basis of alchemy. If you study actual alchemy, that is what is being looked for. The unification of sun and moon, the unification of opposites. They call it the alchemical marriage. That's what this is. So you get to play that out with another human being in relationship. But again, you must know which polarity is the primary for each individual. And there's one really great way to know that. And that is to ask yourself, and you have to choose in this question, you have to choose in your relationship, in your intimate relationship, do you prefer to be cherished or do you prefer to be respected? You have to choose. I know many will say, no, but I want both. And I'm not saying that a relationship would ever exist without respect or without cherishing from either side. But if you had to choose one, would you prefer to be cherished or would you prefer to be respected? So if you would prefer to be cherished, then you know that your primary polarity is the feminine. If you would prefer to be respected, then you know that your primary polarity is the masculine. And the job of the feminine is to respect the masculine. And the job of the masculine is to cherish the feminine. And when masculine cherishes the feminine, masculine is powerful. And when feminine respects masculine, feminine is powerful. So this is a very brief explanation and understanding of how masculine and feminine work in relationship. And as I said in the beginning, this topic is so wide and so vast, and there is so much to cover here, but it cannot be done in simply one podcast. But what I wanted to do was create some understanding and perhaps some fodder for contemplation, consideration, thought around masculine and feminine, since this is such a powerful topic right now in our time. And a topic that perhaps we haven't really had the ability to consider, to question, to maneuver around ever in our history. And it's very exciting that we can talk about these things and discuss these things now, as we wade forward into a future that I think includes a lot more equality of both masculine and feminine energies. Again, with that equality, respecting and honoring their incredible differences. So I hope that with this discussion, you have discovered a little more power for yourself in your natural polarity, and that you have discovered a little more power in your understanding of the feminine energy, and that you have maybe thought about how you can move the feminine energy forward a bit in your own life, in your own practice, in your own psychology, and in your own relationship. We'll definitely talk more about this topic, and if you have other questions or things that you'd like to ask regarding the nature of masculine and feminine, I would love to hear them. And the best place to bring those questions right to me is within my highereducation.yoga membership. So if you haven't joined me yet, please do so. Head over to highereducation.yoga/trial for your $1 2-week trial of the membership. Come hang out with us, join your community of fellow modern mystics, and let's discuss the topic of masculine and feminine in today's modern times. I look forward to seeing you in the membership, and thanks as always for listening to this podcast. Until next time, namaste.